Today we are going to see about reasonable accommodation need and planning. Accommodations are intended to reduce or even eliminate the effects of a student's disability, but they do not reduce learning expectations. There is no guidelines for adapting general education curriculum to meet each student's needs, but each teacher, each student, each classroom is unique and adaptations are specific to each situation. Reasonable accommodation requires positive measures to address the unique needs of persons with disabilities in order to ensure the equal right to work, education, health, and an adequate standard of living. These are usually programmatic in nature. Institutions should be aware of the obligation to provide reasonable accommodation both to staff and in all aspects of service delivery and decision making. The duty of the teacher to provide reasonable accommodation to persons with disabilities can vary significantly and often takes into account many different aspects of society and how to operate. The purpose of this unit is to provide educators, parents, and other related service professionals with a planning process to follow when identifying which students should be considered to get reasonable accommodation for a student with special educational needs. The term reasonable accommodation refers to an adjustment made in a system and based on a proven need to be accommodate an individual with a disability. Reasonable accommodation is a key concept in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, that is UNCRPD, in the year 2006. The reasonable accommodation defines as necessary and appropriate modification and adjustments, not imposing a unbalanced or excessive burden where needed in a particular case to ensure to persons with disabilities the enjoyment or exercise on an equal basis with others of human rights and fundamental freedoms. There are some reasonable accommodations that are appropriate for classroom instructional use that are not appropriate in testing situations. Still, no accommodation should be provided during an assessment that a student has not had an opportunity to learn and use of comfortably and effectively during instruction. Reasonable accommodations are practices and procedures in the areas of presentation, response, setting and timing and scheduling, etc., that provide equitable access during instruction and assessments for students with disabilities. If a student knows their basic math facts, a calculator is an accommodation. If the student does not know their facts, it may be considered a modification. Most accommodation use does not begin and end in school. Students who use accommodations generally will also need them at home, in the community, as they get older, in post-secondary education and at work. Because accommodations can be so vital to helping children with disabilities access the general curriculum, participate in school, that is including extracurricular and non-academic activities, and be educated alongside their peers without disabilities. It provides supports and services to help a student access the general education curriculum and validly demonstrate learning. Each accommodation should be based on what the student needs to learn, and it has been generated for a group of students without considering what will uniquely fit the needs of the individual student. An adjustment or alteration that enables a disabled student to get admission in the school and perform various school activities. Adaptations in teaching learning process permits a disabled student to be considered for a curriculum. It enables the qualified disabled student to perform the essential activities in the school. It recognizes the relevance of impairment if one ignores the impact of an impairment and treats a person with a disability in exactly same way as one treats a person without a disability. A defect situation of inequality will arise. Instead of requiring disabled people to conform to existing norms, the aim is to develop a concept of equality which requires adaptation and change. The obligation to accommodation is not unlimited and is subject to the requirement that the accommodation does not result in a disproportionate burden. Accommodation does not need to be the best or ideal solution but must be effective and practical. Failure to do this may result in violation of obligation. It refers to the reduction of the impact a disability has on a person's capacity to discharge the essential functions of a school. It takes the measures to ensure that a person with a disability is able to discharge his or her function with minimal assistance. It provides an enjoyment or exercise on an equal basis with others of all human rights and fundamental freedoms. In education, it allows students to get an equal education by limiting as much as possible the effects of their disabilities on their performance, with the requirement that the steps not impose significant difficulty or expense on the government. Accommodations are to be reasonable and are intended to provide persons with disabilities compensation for their functional limitations. An important part of ensuring reasonable accommodation is training teachers, school administrators, and education professionals in methods to support persons with disabilities. Reasonable accommodation needs of students with visual disabilities vary greatly by individual and academic activity. Accommodations are practices and procedures in the areas of presentation, response, setting, and timing or scheduling that provide equitable access during instruction and assessments for students with disabilities. Accommodation use should show consistency across classroom instruction, classroom testing, and district assessments. The provision of appropriate facilities for students with special educational needs will typically require the resolution of such issues as accessibility, wayfinding, environmental comfort and safety, the suitability and selection of finishes including color appropriateness, tactile surfaces, and safe internal and external curricular activities. In all cases, statutory obligations with regard to planning and development, building regulations, and health and safety regulations must be observed. Many of these accommodations are used on a regular basis as needed in the general education classroom. Most teachers see them as simply good teaching strategies. Let us see the different kinds of accommodations. Timing accommodations, in which changes are made in length and quantity of time to perform various activities, and it allows a student to take more time to complete a task or a test, have extra time to process oral information and directions, take frequent breaks such as after completing a task, take more time to complete a project, take a test in several timed sessions or over several days, take a test at a specific time of day, flexible scheduling practices, extending or adjusting time, allowing frequent breaks or allow students a break in long lectures, provide extra time to get class. That is, adapt the setting where, when, and with whom. Preferential classroom seating, altering physical room arrangement, reducing or minimizing distractions, visual, auditory, both, or interval period. Provide a structured learning environment. Make separate space for different types of tasks. Possible adapting of non-academic times such as lunch, recess, and physical education. Change student seating. Alter location or personal or classroom supplies for easier access to or minimize distraction. Provide sensory breaks. Provide a written or picture schedule. Reserve front seats for low vision students. Holding classes on the ground floor. Priority seating for students to minimize distractions and enable them to see and hear the teachers. Provide least restrictive and distractive environment. Presentation and accommodations in which materials presented to students are modified and allow a student to listen to audio recordings instead of reading text. Learn content from audiobooks, movies, videos, and digital media instead of reading print versions. Work with fewer items per page or line, materials in a large print size. Have a designated reader. Hear instructions orally. Record a lesson instead of taking notes. Have another student share class notes with him. Be given an outline of a lesson. Use visual presentations of verbal material such as word webs and visual organizers. Be given a written list of instructions. Emphasizing teaching approach, that is visual, auditory, tactile and multisensory approach. Individualizing small group instruction. Taping lectures for replay. Demonstrating and modeling. Using manipulatives, hands-on activities. Pre-teaching vocabulary. Utilizing advanced organizers. Providing visual cues. Tape lessons so the student can listen them again and allow students to tape lessons. Use computer aided instruction and other audio visual equipment. Select alternative textbooks, workbooks or provide books on tape. Highlight main ideas and supporting details in the book. Provide copied material for extra practice. Prioritize drill and practice activities for relevance. Vary the method of lesson presentation using multisensory techniques. Simulations and experiments can be useful. Games, playway method teaching. Ask student to repeat or paraphrase context to check understanding. Arrange for a mentor to work with student in his or her interest area of greatest strength. Provide peer tutoring. Simplify and repeat instructions about in class and homework assignments. Vary instructional pace. Reinforce the use of compensatory strategies, that is pencil grip, mnemonic devices and spell check. Use different kinds of instructional materials. Assess whether student has the necessary prerequisite skills. Determine whether materials are appropriate to the student's current functioning level. Reinforce study skill strategies, that is survey, read, recite and review. Introduce definition of new terms or vocabulary and review to check for understanding. Be aware of students' preferred learning style and provide matching instruction materials. Pre-teach and reteach important concepts. Prepare advanced organizers or study guides for new material. Audio taping and video taping class sessions. Face the class when speaking. Identify key points in the readings and lectures. Review material regularly. Encourage study groups. Repeat and summarize segments of each presentation and review it in its entirety. Summarize abstract concepts in specific terms and illustrate them with examples. Provide concrete examples, share personal experiences and provide hands-on training. Keep all instruction clear, concise and reinforce them with brief cue words. Repeat or reward complicated directions. Use an alarm to help with time management. Provide reading list or syllabi in advance to allow time for ordering electronic versions of text and other reading materials for scanning or brailing of text. Provide in advance a list of videos that will be used in class or assigned to enable private viewing with a video scriber. Model and reinforce organizational systems, that is color or braille coding system. Write out homework assignments, check students' recording of assignments. Adapt homework assignments towards student strength. Set time expectations for assignments. Teach study and organizational skills. Schedule before or after school tutoring and homework assistance. Prioritize reading list, enabling students to engage more easily with relevant course text. Avoid last minute location changes and provide advance notice for students to make necessary arrangements if needed. Plan field trips and such special projects as internships well in advance and alert field supervisors to whatever adaptations may be needed. Provide clearly sequenced instruction. Provide braille text, large print materials and audio books. Using decoder for television and film. Having access to any special equipment. Visual, oral and tactile is incorporated into instruction. Access to learning resources and instructional materials outside of class. Outlines, books, materials on tape. Allow students to use laptop computers for essay exams if they prefer to do so. A note taker or audio recorder. Access to class notes, a note taker, laptop or use of an audio recorder for lectures. Allow students to use computers with speech output, spell check and grammar check. Reading aloud written materials. Use a braille writer. Use of an adapted calculator. Modified writing tools, that is dark felt tip pens, dark lined writing paper, then lighting aids, low vision devices including magnifiers, monocular glass, closed circuit TV, enlarged print materials, textbooks, workbooks, worksheets, tactile maps and diagrams. Use positive reinforcement, use concrete reinforcement, check often for understanding and review, provide peer tutoring, requesting parent reinforcement, ask the student to repeat and explain the directions, reinforce long-term assignment timelines, repeat, review and drill. Give weekly progress reports, provide before and after school tutoring, conferring with students daily, bi-weekly, weekly. Setting accommodations in which varying are made in the context of where tests are administered and who administer test, and it allows a student to work or take a test in a different setting, such as a quiet room with few distractions. Sit, he learns best, for example, near the teacher. Take a test in small group setting. Use sensory tools. Change the location of the test if needed. Students can take test in a distraction-free space, potentially a resource room, so it is easier for the child to focus. Respond changes in which students are allowed to use a different manner of responding and allow a student to give responses in a form, oral or written, that is easier for him. Capture response on an audio recorder. Use a spelling dictionary or electronic spell checker. Use a word processor to type notes or give responses in class. Use a calculator or table of math facts. Completing assignments requires an array of skills and capacities. Individuals must be able to follow directions, obtain resources, sustain effort, and monitor effectiveness. Students sometimes are reluctant to ask for help or lose interest and refuse to continue. To help students prepare for tests, teachers may need to provide practice with the testing format, use of sample questions and explanations of the scoring procedures. To provide constructive feedback after test, additional instruction on areas of need identified on the test, shortening length of test, changing test format. Essays can be given in the format of fill in the blanks and multiple choice. Adjusting time for test completion, scribing test answers for students, oral instead of written test, use of headphones to reduce auditory distractions, supervised short breaks during the test period. Questions also may be useful to teams as they consider which accommodations are reasonable and effective for a given student. Who will be the responsible for preparing the accommodation? Who will be the responsible for implementing the accommodation? Who will monitor the accommodation's implementation and effectiveness? Who is going to pay for the cost of the accommodation? Who needs to know about the accommodation? Has everyone, including the student, agreed to the accommodation? What previous responsibilities must be prepared, give up in order to this responsibility? What resources, space and equipment will be required for making and implementing the accommodation? What is the timeline for implementing and evaluating the accommodation? Will the accommodation lead to the students' independence? Where and when will the accommodation be easy to implement? Where and when will be the accommodation be prepared? Where and when will be the accommodation will be implemented? Where and when can the accommodation be implemented so that it does no input student in an unfavorable position? How much time will be required for making the accommodation? How will the quality of the accommodation be monitored and evaluated? How will the effectiveness of the accommodation be determined? How will the intent or purpose of the accommodation be communicated to the student? How does the accommodation fit with the student's present level of educational performance and annual goals? How does the accommodation benefit the student? The types of disabilities are based on sensory, intellectual and physical aspects of the individual. Nature of each disability is different from the other, but some of their needs are common, particularly the societal attitude and the barrier-free environment. The provision of mobility aids and appliances as well as disabled-friendly furniture and transport should also be considered. Therefore, we need to understand the problems in the educational system and should foster barrier-free access so as to ensure that every child learns. The teacher should examine the provision of reasonable accommodation within the classroom, school and provides step-by-step guidance to ensure an understanding of its role within the world of work. It is written to empower persons with disability to understand and access their rights as well as to address the unimagined concerns and logistical challenges experienced by the students. It seeks to expose how to identify and minimize or eliminate barriers for people with disability to support their full integration into the school. Therefore, simple classroom and curricular accommodations equal big results.